The sun was just beginning to come up as I got into my car and started my journey. As the miles stretched out behind me and the scenery around me became more rural, I slowly began to let go of all the things that I was leaving behind. The chores that still needed to be done, work projects that needed more attention, upcoming activities, to-do lists, concerns about family, friends, the state of our country and the world, all the things that make up the normal day-to-day life. As I continued and I grew closer to my destination, I started to feel eager with anticipation, but also a sense of wondering, how would it be this time? I was traveling to spend several days on a retreat at the Abbey of Gethsemane in Kentucky, something that I've done numerous times over the last few years. Gethsemane is a Trappist monastery run by Catholic monks who live there in residence. It's most well known as being the home of Thomas Merton. As a guest, I took a vow of silence for my time there. The only time that I spoke during those days was when I joined the monks in praying the hours. I went to Gethsemane to slow down, to quiet my spirit, and to listen to God. The transition from my normal life into the life of the monastery always took me at least several hours, and usually most of that first day. So during that first day, my mind was still running and my body was anxious to be doing something. Most of us are used to leading busy lives, and it takes time to transition into that mode of being. Because of this, I usually spent a good part of that first day hiking. The monastery is surrounded by 2,000 acres of woods and fields, and walking among them gave my body something to do while it also helped to clear and quiet my mind. By Compline that first night, I was settled in. The next few days were a blend of prayer, reading, hiking, and stillness. I'm able to be with God, to listen to God with very few external distractions when I'm at Gethsemane. And that is precisely the point of a retreat. But just as I would start to get used to this new rhythm, it would be time to pack up and go home, back to the busyness of everyday life. But I never returned the same person as I was when I left. I would have a sense of calm that would stay with me for a while, and a renewed conviction about ordering my life around prayer. I felt closer to God as a result of this time away, and I carried that feeling into my interactions with others. Over time, my life would start to feel too busy again, and I would reach back for some of the benefits that I gained from my retreat. Slow down, prioritize prayer, and take time to listen to God instead of always being the one who's doing the talking. Sometime within the next 6 months or so, I'd find myself yearning for the quietness and simplicity of the monastery, and I'd start to consider another retreat. This ebb and flow between quietness and busyness is what our gospel story today illustrates. Very few of us are called to be monastics like the monks who live at Gethsemane. I certainly am not. But we are all called to seek and serve Christ in our daily lives. And that's exactly what we see both Mary and Martha doing. The story of Mary and Martha is familiar to many of us. Often these two women are held up as dichotomies. You're either like Martha or you're like Mary. If you're like Martha, then you need to reprioritize some things so that you can be more contemplative like Mary. If you're like Mary, then you need to pay attention to what's going on around you and be more helpful to people who are serving you. I think that to pit these two sisters against each other, though, is not the best way to look at this story. The sisters represent two different and equally necessary ways of serving Jesus and one another. And we're given both of these images within this one story. Last week, we heard the story of the Good Samaritan. Jesus illustrates through a parable what it means to serve others, to show kindness and hospitality to absolutely anyone who needs it. The story of the Good Samaritan is a story about showing hospitality to strangers, and it ends with Jesus saying, "Go and do likewise." We immediately transition into our passage for today, where we find Martha and Mary doing likewise, but just in very different ways. The context here is significant. We are in Martha's home, and Jesus is not a stranger to Mary and Martha. While we don't know what their exact connection was, this story and the story of Jesus raising their brother Lazarus that we find in the Gospel of John both indicate an intimate relationship. Jesus, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus are presented in ways that suggest a long-term friendship between Jesus and this family. Whereas the Good Samaritan is about showing hospitality to strangers, therefore, the story of Mary and Martha can be seen as being about showing hospitality to those with whom we are already in a relationship. I think it's safe to say that we can all identify with what's going on in this passage. We've all had experiences of entertaining people in our homes or in our family members' homes. Friends, holidays, dinner parties, family reunions. One major difference between then and now, though, is that Martha likely had no idea that Jesus was coming until he knocked on her door. And although the scripture doesn't explicitly say so, we can assume that probably Jesus' disciples were also with him when he entered Martha's house. And they had been journeying, they had been traveling. They were all hungry and tired. They needed somewhere to stay and something to eat. Martha often gets a bad rap in this story, but I feel compassion for her. It was her house that Jesus and his followers entered. I'm sure that she was happy to see them, but she was suddenly put in a position where she had to provide immediate hospitality for her guests. Luke lets us know that it was clearly Martha who was running the house, and it was Martha who was stressed. Again, I think that we can all identify with this feeling and this context. The Greek that is used in Martha's request of Jesus doesn't indicate anger, as is sometimes portrayed, but rather it indicates a sense of her feeling overwhelmed. She's doing her best to be hospitable to Jesus and his friends, and Mary, her sister, who should be helping her in this hospitality, has parked herself on the floor in front of their guest of honor and is listening to him. At some point, Martha loses her patience, and she asks Jesus to intervene and insists that Mary help her. Martha asking their honored guest to intervene in a sisterly dispute is one of the largest clues that we have to the closeness of Jesus with this family. In that culture, Martha would have never dared to ask a stranger or even an acquaintance to stop his teaching and reprimand her sister. But instead of insisting that Mary help Martha, Jesus affirms Mary's decision to sit and listen to him. Jesus points out that the many things that are distracting Martha, her attempts at hospitality, are not actually serving her or, ironically, him in that particular moment. He says that Mary has chosen the better part, and it will not be taken from her. We don't know what Martha's reaction was to Jesus' words, and this omission allows us as readers to use our own imaginations, to ask how we would have responded in such a situation. I dare say that most of us identify with Martha more than Mary. We are busy. We're running around, doing what needs to be done in our lives, trying to do our best to care for those who are around us. We too, perhaps, could stand to have Jesus point out that it's okay, even good, to stop running around, to take some time to sit and to listen. Interestingly, while Jesus affirms Mary's decision to sit and listen to him, her role in this story appears largely passive. She remains seated the entire time. She's not involved in the action of the story, and she never actually speaks. Because of this, Mary is sometimes criticized as being lazy or unhelpful to her sister. But just like I think that there's more to Martha's situation than we initially read, I think the same thing is true about Mary's. Her decision to sit at the feet of Jesus was not a passive decision. It was a very active one. When I read this story, I always imagine Mary being so completely enthralled with Jesus that everything and everyone else in the room just fades away. I picture her sitting at his feet, absorbing every word. It was very unusual for a woman to be allowed to sit at the feet of a rabbi in this time. Her very presence there broke proprietary codes and went against the hospitality that she was meant to be serving him. Despite this, Mary doesn't seem to hesitate at all to sit down in front of Jesus, and Jesus welcomes her to sit with his other followers and listen to what he's saying. And so here, in the persons of Mary and Martha, we have two models of hospitality, two models of service. First one is going through making physical preparations, literally serving others through our actions. And the second one is sitting quietly, listening to the other, giving them our complete and undivided attention. Both of these models apply to our interactions with each other, with people, but they also apply to our interactions with God. Recall that this story is about how we serve those with whom we already have a relationship, and that includes our relationship with God. Last week, we heard that to inherit eternal life, we must love the Lord our God with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our strength, with all our mind, and we must love our neighbor as ourselves. We then heard a parable about what it means to put that love of God and neighbor into practical, physical action. Next week, we're going to hear Jesus instructing his disciples on how to pray, giving them the Lord's Prayer. I don't think that it's any accident that Luke put this story of Mary and Martha in between the stories of the Good Samaritan and Jesus giving us the Lord's Prayer. The women's story acts as a kind of bridge. All three passages are about serving one another and serving God, but Mary and Martha bring together these ideas of active service and quiet prayer into a single story. Mary got to sit at the feet of the man Jesus to listen to him speak. Our equivalent, and the equivalent for Luke's initial audience, is prayer. The idea that we need to slow down, to imagine ourselves sitting at the feet of Jesus in our prayer, and to listen, to really listen for what God is saying to us. That lesson transcends time and culture. Listening is not a passive activity, it's very active. And being silent, whether with God or one another, so that we can open ourselves to really listen, can be very difficult. But it's what we're called to do. We are called to listen every bit as much as we are called to physically serve our neighbor. Quiet contemplation and active service are not opposing forces. They are two necessary aspects of our lives of faith. We must have both. We must practice both. Our prayer should inform our actions in the world, and our actions in the world should inform what we bring to God in prayer. When this attempt at balance is off kilter, as it often is, it's good to ask what can be done to bring it back. Since those of us here live active lives in the world, my bet is that probably most of us identify more with Martha than with Mary. Jesus doesn't condemn Martha's actions at all. He knows that she is doing her best to serve him. But he does point out that there's another part, the quiet listening part, which her running around is preventing her from doing. So this week, I challenge all of us to take stock of where we currently are in this ebb and flow between busyness and quiet. Imagine yourselves as characters in this story. and try to allow Jesus' encouragement to sit and listen to him take root in your own life.